You know, sometimes the people who claim to be in your corner are the ones secretly hoping you never make it out of the same place you both started. The silent competitor is that friend who smiles when you talk about your dreams, but inside they're cataloging every accomplishment you share as proof they're falling behind. You'll notice it in the smallest ways. A flicker in their eyes when you mention a promotion. A quick subject change when you describe something you're proud of. An awkward pause when everyone else is clapping for you. It's subtle, but it's there, humming underneath every conversation like a quiet current of resentment. This friend is rarely confrontational. They won't come out and tell you they feel threatened by your growth. That would mean admitting they measure their worth against yours. So instead, they pretend. They say all the right words. I'm so happy for you. You deserve this. That's amazing. But the energy never feels clean. And your spirit knows when energy isn't clean. You can sense it in the hollow tone of their praise, the way they never ask follow-up questions about your success, or the way they suddenly get busy when you're celebrating something big. Over time, being around a silent competitor can exhaust you in ways you don't even recognize, because you start to shrink yourself just a little to keep the peace. You downplay what's going well so you don't trigger their insecurity. You hold back your excitement because you're afraid it'll make them feel small. You become a smaller, duller version of yourself to avoid making them uncomfortable. And that is the most tragic loss, because your light was never meant to be dimmed for anyone's convenience. Sometimes this dynamic starts early, in childhood, when competition was how you learned to feel significant. Other times it creeps in later, when someone feels stuck while watching you evolve. And if you're not careful, you'll carry the burden of their unspoken rivalry for years, mistaking it for loyalty. But loyalty without genuine celebration is not real friendship. If someone can't clap when you win, they won't be able to stand beside you when life asks you to grow even bigger. So pay attention to the friend who's always comparing, always competing in ways they pretend not to. Notice the friend who only gets inspired when they feel ahead. And remember this: you are not responsible for managing someone else's self-worth. You were never meant to apologize for your progress or dim your radiance to soothe another person's fragile ego. Your joy deserves room to stretch out its arms without fear. When you find the courage to see the silent competitor for what they are, you reclaim the energy you've been wasting trying to keep them comfortable. And in that moment, you set yourself free. There's a certain kind of friend who always seems to be carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. So the freedom to be or not to be, 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 the freedom to be or not to be. No matter when you call or what you're going through, their problems will eclipse everything else. You might start to notice that every conversation circles back to their pain, their disappointments, their endless string of bad luck. They are the chronic victim, and being close to them can feel like standing next to a dark cloud that never moves. At first, you feel compassion. You tell yourself you're being a good friend by listening. You offer your support, your time, your advice. You become their safe place, and it feels meaningful. But over time, something starts to shift. You begin to realize that no matter how much you give, it's never enough to change the story they keep telling themselves. Because the chronic victim doesn't really want solutions. They want sympathy. They want an audience for their suffering, a witness to the injustice of their life. And every time you try to lift them up, they find another reason to stay in the same place. This is where you start to feel drained, because while you're pouring out encouragement and empathy, they are simply taking. They rarely ask how you're doing. They don't create space for your struggles or celebrate your wins. And if you try to share your own burdens, you'll often find they quickly pivot back to theirs. Their pain becomes the center of gravity, pulling all your energy in and leaving you feeling empty. If you're not careful, you start to feel guilty for setting boundaries or for not having the capacity to absorb their problems every time they call. You start to question whether you're selfish for needing space. But you are not selfish. You are human. And even the strongest among us can only carry so much before we collapse under the weight of someone else's unresolved patterns. What makes the chronic victim so challenging is that they often believe their suffering entitles them to unlimited access to your heart and mind. But the truth is, no one is entitled to drain your spirit simply because they refuse to take responsibility for their healing. Compassion does not mean self-sacrifice. Being a good friend does not require you to be someone's emotional dumping ground. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and let them find their own strength. Because as long as you keep rescuing them, they will never learn to stand. You can care about someone deeply and still refuse to be consumed by their endless crisis. You can offer empathy without surrendering your joy, and you can honor your own peace by recognizing when it's time to step out of the role they've cast you in. When you finally do, you'll feel the lightness that comes from releasing what was never yours to hold. And that is how you protect the sacred fire of your own spirit. You've probably met the friend who only seems to appear when life is going well for you or when they need something. They have a way of resurfacing just in time to share in your good fortune or to make a quiet request they hope you won't refuse. This is the opportunist, the person whose loyalty is always conditional. Their connection to you isn't built on genuine care, it's built on convenience. In the beginning, it feels flattering to be needed. Maybe you tell yourself you're just being helpful or generous. Maybe you convince yourself that it's normal for people to lean on each other sometimes. But after a while, the pattern becomes clear. They don't call just to check in or to ask how your heart is holding up. They don't show up when you're going through hard times unless there's something in it for them. Their attention is a transaction, a subtle bargain that always leaves you paying more than you receive. The opportunist knows exactly how to play to your good nature. They'll compliment you just enough to soften you up. They'll act as though your presence in their life is a blessing, as though you're the only person who truly understands them. But when your resources dry up, whether it's money, energy, connections, or validation, they disappear like mist in the morning sun. It can feel disorienting to realize someone you trusted never really saw you as a person, only as a source of what they wanted. What makes this dynamic so draining is the slow erosion of trust. Every time they reach out, a small part of you wonders if there's another ask hidden behind the friendly words. You start to feel suspicious of their intentions, questioning whether any moment you shared was ever sincere. And over time, you begin to guard your heart, bracing for the day they'll vanish again when your usefulness fades. You deserve friendships that aren't built on hidden agendas. You deserve people who stand beside you when you have nothing to offer but your presence. Because real connection is not a transaction. It's not measured by what you can give or how much you can provide. It's measured by whether someone values your humanity, even when you have no favors to grant. Instantly, you feel happy when you have no favors to grant. When you recognize an opportunist for who they are, you reclaim your power to choose differently. You learn to set boundaries that protect your energy from being siphoned off by people who only see you as a means to an end. And you discover that the most liberating truth is this: You are not obligated to be available to anyone who treats your kindness as a resource to exploit. When you finally stop feeding the opportunist, you make room in your life for relationships rooted in mutual respect and genuine care. And that is when you discover the peace that comes from knowing your worth can never be reduced to what you can give away. There's a friend whose words never sound outright cruel, but somehow, after you talk to them, you feel smaller than you did before. This is the subtle underminer. They've mastered the art of disguising criticism as concern, of slipping in tiny doubts beneath the surface of casual conversation. You can't always put your finger on it at first because they wrap their skepticism in a soft voice and thoughtful expressions. But deep down, your spirit feels the cut every time. Maybe you share a new goal, something you've been working up the courage to try. You're excited, hopeful, a little nervous, and they tilt their head and say, "Are you sure that's realistic?" Or, "I'd hate to see you get disappointed." They'll insist they're only protecting you, that they don't want you to get hurt. But the truth is, they don't want to see you rise to a place they can't reach. Your ambition threatens the stories they've told themselves about what's possible. Over time, their quiet disapproval seeps into your thoughts. You find yourself second-guessing your instincts. You shrink your dreams just enough to avoid their judgment. You tell yourself you're being practical, when really, you're just afraid of outgrowing the comfort of their approval. And that is exactly how the subtle underminer drains your joy, not with open hostility, but with a steady drip of doubt that erodes your confidence, piece by piece. What makes this dynamic so deceptive is that they often believe they're doing you a favor. They see themselves as the voice of reason. And because they don't raise their voice or throw tantrums, it's easy to dismiss your own feelings of unease. You start to believe that maybe you are too ambitious, too idealistic, too naive. You start to feel grateful for their guidance, even as it chips away at your sense of possibility. But here's the truth. You were never meant to make yourself smaller to keep someone else comfortable. And you've never been meant to protect a situation that no one could control or hide for so long that it can. You don't have to earn someone's approval to be worthy of dreaming. You don't have to apologize for wanting more than the life they've settled for. And you certainly don't have to carry their limitations on your back. The people who truly love you will encourage you to grow, even if it means you outpace them. They won't pretend to protect you while quietly resenting your progress. They'll stand beside you in your victories and your failures, not as critics disguised as friends, but as companions who believe in the fullness of your potential. When you finally see the subtle underminer for who they are, you reclaim the right to trust your own voice again. And in that moment, you take back the power you've given away, one small doubt at a time. There's a kind of friend who never says exactly what they mean, but always makes sure you feel the sting of their disapproval. They won't tell you outright that they're upset or jealous or threatened by your choices. Instead, they wrap their resentment in sarcasm and silence, leaving you to decipher the meaning behind every sigh, every loaded comment, every look that lingers just a little too long. That is the passive aggressor, and their tactics are as exhausting as they are confusing. You'll hear it when you share good news, and they respond with a flat, "Must be nice." Or when you're excited about a new relationship, and they say, "I'm sure it won't last long anyway," followed by a laugh that never reaches their eyes. They never take ownership of their hostility. They just sprinkle it into the conversation and wait for you to react. If you call it out, they'll act bewildered. "I was only joking," they'll say, or "You're too sensitive." And in that moment, you start questioning yourself. instead of holding them accountable. Over time, this pattern can erode your self-confidence in ways you don't even realize. You begin to anticipate their barbs before they arrive. You rehearse your words carefully so you don't give them ammunition. You tell yourself it's easier to stay quiet about what matters to you than to weather the subtle punishments that always follow your honesty. And in doing so, you start to betray yourself to keep the peace. The passive aggressor thrives on this imbalance. As long as you're the one doubting your reactions, they never have to confront their own behavior. They get to keep their hands clean while you absorb the discomfort. And the more you adjust yourself to avoid their bitterness, the more power you give them over your sense of worth. It takes courage to recognize that someone who can't be direct about their feelings isn't capable of healthy connection. Because real friendship is built on openness, even when it's uncomfortable. It's built on the willingness to speak the truth without disguising it as a joke or punishing someone with silence. It's built on mutual respect, not manipulation. When you finally see the passive aggressor for who they are, you'll start to understand how much of your energy you spent trying to decode their moods and tiptoe around their unspoken grievances. You'll realize you've been shrinking your own voice to avoid stepping on landmines they buried in every interaction. But you don't have to keep playing that game. You don't have to keep apologizing for feelings that don't belong to you. The moment you stop dancing around their bitterness and start standing in your own clarity, you set yourself free to create relationships that are honest, direct, and safe. And that freedom is worth every boundary you have to draw. You'll know you've encountered the vision shrinker when every time you share something bold, a dream, a plan, a hope, you're met with the same tired refrain, be realistic. They cloak their cynicism in the language of practicality. They tell you they're only trying to help you avoid disappointment, that they've seen enough of life to know what's possible and what isn't. But the truth is, they can't see beyond the borders of their own limitations, and they don't want you to either. At first, their warnings might sound wise. They'll remind you of all the people who failed, all the ways something could go wrong, all the reasons you should just be content with what you already have. They call it maturity. They call it common sense. But you can feel in your gut that it's really just fear dressed up as advice. Fear of what it would mean if you actually did the things they never had the courage to try. Fear that your success would make them look in the mirror and see how small they've let their own life become. You don't have to be reckless to believe in yourself. You don't have to be naive to trust that there's something more waiting for you. But the vision shrinker wants you to believe that dreaming big is foolish, that wanting more is selfish, that striving for something greater is an insult to the people who settled. If you're not careful, their doubts start to sound like your own thoughts. You begin to measure your aspirations by their fears. You start to cut your ideas down to fit inside the safe little box where they've chosen to live. What they won't tell you is that their comfort zone has become a cage. And every time you share your vision, you rattle the bars they've convinced themselves are protecting them. That's why they need you to stay small, so they can keep pretending the cage doesn't exist. But you don't owe anyone an apology for wanting a life that feels true to you. You don't have to justify your dreams to people who have abandoned theirs. You don't have to let their disbelief become your ceiling. The people meant to walk beside you will never ask you to shrink to make them feel comfortable. They will stand in the glow of your vision and cheer you on, even if they don't fully understand it. When you finally see the vision shrinker for who they are, you reclaim the right to imagine a life that excites you. You remember that your purpose was never to play small so someone else wouldn't feel insecure, You were born to expand, to stretch, to rise beyond what anyone thought possible, and no amount of caution disguised as care can ever take that away from you.